video in the series Australians Take Back Your Country. And this week we've had some new developments, not only concerning the virus but other matters. First, the penny seems to have dropped with the government. They realise that we live in a very hostile world. The Prime Minister was drawing an analogy with the 1930s, and the obvious, potentially, indeed, already hostile country, by the way they are treating us, is the Communist government of China. And the Prime Minister has made a commitment, a significant commitment, in relation to defence. At least on paper, it seemed a significant commitment. However, when you analysed it, all that is happening really is about 75 billion, which is a lot of money, extras to be spent on defence over 10 years. It's basically the same proposal for defence as in the last white paper. But as I say, an additional 75 billion. The defence forces are not to be significantly increased. Nothing very much is to be brought forward. And the extraordinary contract to buy 12 French submarines, which haven't yet been constructed or even designed because they are based on a nuclear submarine, but in fact they will be converted to diesel. That is, they'll be taken back in relation to technology, and they won't be delivered for many years, probably the first in the early 30s, and the whole fleet won't be together at the time of the centenary of the victory over Japan in 2045, when there'll be a naval review, no doubt, in Sydney Harbour, and we will expect the King, probably King William, to come and review the fleet. We still won't have the full submarine fleet. This is a scandal. Well over $200 billion is going to be poured into this, and it will do nothing for the defence of Australia. And as I mentioned in a piece I've written for Spectator, which will appear on Friday, and you can see it by Googling Spectator Australia and my name. This is an outrageous scandal. And the government can't be taken seriously about the defence of Australia if it's going to pour more than $200 billion into this ridiculous contract, which is on the never to buy what will be obsolete machines, and which the Americans seem to be reluctant to put weapons in because they don't trust some aspects of the French security in relation to it. If the government's serious about defence, they should cancel this contract and cancel it tomorrow. It was only taken out, the Turnbull Pine contract was only taken out to preserve government seats in South Australia and to raid the defence budget, as Labor also has done, but not as big. It is outrageous. The defence budget should be used for the defence of Australia. It's very hard to take them seriously. The second thing to note, and I mentioned this in the piece, is that the Victorian government, which has very close relationships with the Chinese Communist government, the Victorian government is reintroducing lockdowns because of a number of increased cases of the Wuhan virus. I don't use the name that the World Health Organization gives. They're just a communist front. They're under the control of the communists. It's the Wuhan virus, the virus which started in Wuhan, as far as we know. And what the government is doing is that they are reintroducing the lockdown. Certain suburbs will be locked down, and even buildings, housing commission buildings, public tenants are being told they can't leave those buildings. It's probably unlawful and may well lead to serious actions in the future, which the taxpayers will have to pay for. But both governments and media are panicking in relation to the number of cases of the virus. The only real figure is a terrible figure, and that is the number of deaths. But the rate of deaths per million is the real figure. We have a low rate. We have a low rate because of the fact that we are a remote island. It wasn't because of the government. We don't need more lockdowns because of more cases. You find more cases of the virus because more testing is being done. And you can't wipe out the virus until we get vaccination or the country eventually becomes immune to it because a large number of people have it. But most cases are not fatal. The vulnerable, that is the very sick and the elderly, are very vulnerable. They have to be protected. But the idea of continuing the lockdown, doing serious damage to small business, putting people out of work, adding billions to the debt of Australia is not the way to react. There has to be a new way of looking at this. And a lot of the problem, of course, relates to the government panicking. They panicked at the beginning. They panicked because they had modeling which exaggerated what the virus would do and the number of people who would be killed. And they were even talking of 150,000 people dying in Australia, which is absolutely ridiculous. They neutralized the hospitals, stopped elective surgery because of the large number that were going to go into the hospitals. Those beds weren't needed. Very few were receiving intensive treatment because of the virus. It is a complete mess. Although the media is saying the government's done well, the government is saying they've done well. The trouble that they've caused, the serious damage that they've caused, the businesses that they've ruined, the people they've put out of work is a very serious thing. And we can't do this every time there is a pandemic. We have to react sensibly. We have to react according to world's best practice. If the government, with its score of advisors, had looked at world's best practice, they would have found it was in Taiwan. Taiwan is about the same population as Australia. They're very close to China, but they managed to stop entry seriously. We still can't do it properly, as we've seen in Victoria. They managed to control entry. They managed to do the quarantine properly. They did it without lockdowns, and they've had about 4 or 5 deaths, not the 104, 105 we've had. They've done it much more successfully without the cost of lockdowns, without ruining businesses and throwing people out of work, without lockdowns. And the government is still panicking. And I must say the media is not helping you, because the media is constantly panicking, reporting the number of cases, which of course increase because more tests are being done. The really important thing is the number of deaths, and that is still comparatively low. Not as low as it should be if we'd followed what the Taiwanese had done. So that's the situation now. We're in a serious situation. The government is continuing to panic. The premiers are power crazy, closing frontiers, saying one day you can have so many people in the restaurant, and next week you can have so many more, suddenly deciding that on the 10th of July, more businesses may open, then closing those businesses. We cannot go on this way with the premiers behaving as though they're dictators. The National Cabinet is a disaster because it tries to reach a consensus instead of examining the real issues and examining what is world's best practice and following that. Peter.
Gee, you've covered a few things there, Professor. I'll start by this. I totally agree with you. I don't call it what the mainstream media are calling this virus. I call it the Chinese virus out of Wuhan, and that's exactly what it is. It's very interesting. I saw on television the other night where a gentleman had this pack that he had to do testing and all the rest of it with this Chinese virus and leave it at his front doorstep, and they'd come and pick it up. Well, they never did. He did everything right, left it at his doorstep. They never even come and picked it up. I think the Premier of Victoria is out of his depth. I think we've got people in power that the power's gone to their heads. They don't really know what to do now, but they're quite happy to have these protests where thousands and thousands of people can gather. And there is no way that those people were social distancing. And as you mentioned, 10 or 20 in a little cafe or whatever, it's just out of control. I would like to know how many people have recovered from this virus. I would like to know, here in South Australia, we've had hairdressing salons open the whole time with this lockdown. I would like to know how many hairdressers have come down with it. I'd like to know how many doctors have come down with it. I'd like to know how many carers have come down. These people are mixing and touching people in a very close environment. We don't hear any of this. I think we're being taken for fools, a lot of this. And I'd like to know also, let's just say that this Chinese virus never happened, and these people that have passed away, which I feel very, very sorry for, would have they passed away with pneumonia or something? We don't really know. We've got to be very, very careful with the elderly and our vulnerable, for sure. But as you've said in the past, David, we just can't keep shutting this place down. I mean, what really annoys me, you've got people on welfare, on the dole, that never had a job, some of them, and they're getting double the money. Our pensioners are suffering. We're handing out all this money for these the stimulation. We're not going to be able to pay this back. That's the biggest problem. And I'll now touch on, you mentioned about the submarines, where Christopher Pyne, who was in Parliament, he's no longer, was pushing it. Also, the Liberal Party. You know, these submarines, nuclear engines, and they want to put a diesel engine in them. Well, that's like us getting rid of our car and going back to horse and cart. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we, the average person of Australia, are sick and tired of these people being on huge dollars, huge perks, and they're absolutely making decisions that are destroying this country. And this has got to stop, David. It really has to stop. And what we do about it, well, I think what you mentioned earlier, Australians, take back your country. And that's what's got to happen. Australians have to take back their country, because we cannot continue down this track. We're not going to have jobs for future generations. We've got politicians that have signed away our jobs, our security, and our sovereignty. And I wouldn't have thought that our own people would have done this to us. And we need some big, big change. We really do, David.
I think you're right, Peter. One of the problems in this is computer modelling. It's very fashionable in government circles. And you'll find constantly that premiers and prime ministers talk about the advice they've received, as though they must always follow the advice of unelected officials. And they talk about the computer modelling, and the computer modelling that they've been following, based very much on what has happened at the Imperial College in London and Washington State University. A lot of this modelling has been highly exaggerated. It's produced exaggerated conclusions. They were talking about, I think, over 2.25 million people in the United States dying from the virus, and large numbers in the UK, much larger than have happened. And I'm not saying, not seriously worrying, or I'm not trying to downplay the effect of death, but what is happening is that people are being reported as dying of or from the virus when they died with the virus. And people who are very elderly and very frail are very susceptible, and that's why they have to be looked after. But you can't say that they died because of the virus when they may have died for other reasons. And a lot of the figures are not very well established. What we're finding with computer modelling is something that we found with global warming. And I must say it's very cold in Sydney this winter. We don't seem to be having a globally warming winter. But the fact is that a lot of the conclusions in relation to global warming and what it would do to the world's economy was based again on computer modelling. One of the great statisticians who was very much in charge of modelling years ago said, models are always wrong, and they're always wrong because you can't put everything into them. They're just useful tools, but to treat them as if they are infallible is ridiculous. And they've done that in relation to the rising of the seas and the increasing in the temperature. And you were talking to me the other day about a couple of cases where Mr. Rudd, for example, Mr. Rudd, who was talking about the seas rising and the climate change being the moral issue of the century. And we now find that he is buying a property at Sunshine Beach near Noosa in Queensland, close to the beach. He doesn't seem to be concerned about the seas rising. The former Prime Minister, Ms. Gillard, who's also concerned about the seas rising, bought a house in South Australia, not far from the sea, and Mr. Flannery, or Dr. Flannery, the one who was telling us that our dams would be forever empty and we wouldn't see snow again in the Alps and so on, making all these predictions. Bought for a while, I believe he sold it, but bought for a while a house on a river near Sydney. Now, one would think that if you were predicting the rising of the seas as a result of global warming and significant changes in the temperature with those sea rises, you certainly wouldn't be going out buying properties. This is the problem that we've got. We have the politicians taking on every new fashion that seems to come from overseas, and these are causing us serious damage. Peter.
Yeah, you there, David?
Yes.
Yes, I've lost you. The screen's gone blank, but I'll keep talking.
Over here, you seem to have gone sideways.
Okay, yeah, the screen's just blank now. It's just gone black, but shall I keep talking?
Well, perhaps at this stage we might conclude our little discussion because I think we both exhausted the issue, and we might leave the issue now, and we'll continue on the next seminar that we arrange.
Good idea, David. Good idea.
Thank you very much, Peter. And there's a link on the YouTube site, which is to a petition, and that summarizes what we're about in relation to Take Back Your Country. Peter.
Yes, thanks very much, David. So I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.